The first thing people noticed was how quiet the rural route felt once he was gone. Not the ordinary quiet that comes with cornfields and long stretches of two-lane road. This was a different kind. A quiet that made the mailboxes look like witnesses. A quiet that made even the dogs in the yards seem less confident about barking. Evan Price had been a delivery driver for a mid-sized logistics company that served the thin edges of 3 counties. The places where GPS sometimes sighed and gave up. The places where the same diner waitress called you Han even if you'd never met. The places where the road names changed without warning because the county line shifted and nobody cared enough to coordinate. He liked the route. That was the strange part. Most drivers fought for city runs because city runs meant efficiency and tips and bathrooms that didn't require a gas station key attached to a cinder block. Evan asked for the rural loops. He liked the breathing room. He liked the way a day could feel long without feeling crowded. He liked the ritual. Load the van, scan the packages, sip coffee that tasted like burnt toast, then disappear into the rolling geometry of fields and tree lines. He also liked the people, not in a sentimental way, in a practical way. The older couple who left bottled water in a cooler by the porch in summer. The widower who signed with a shaky hand and always asked about the weather like it was a hobby. The farmer who never came to the door but left a handwritten note on a nail. Leave by shed, dog friendly. Evan remembered details, not because he was trying to be charming, but because his mind worked like a map. If you remembered the details, the route behaved. If you forgot them, the route punished you. You could lose an hour to a road that looked passable until it turned into mud, or a driveway that split in two and led to 2 different barns, and one of them wasn't connected to the house at all. On the morning he vanished, Evan did everything the same way he always did. He arrived early. He checked his scanner. He made a joke to the warehouse supervisor about the coffee being legally classified as a solvent. He loaded the van in a methodical rhythm, heavier boxes on the bottom, fragile stuff against the inner wall, envelopes in the front tote. He wore the same faded baseball cap he wore every day, the one with a stitched logo so worn it looked like a ghost. He texted his girlfriend Leah before he pulled out. Long one today, dinner late, love you. Leah responded with a heart and a reminder to grab cat litter on the way home. Evan responded with a thumbs up. He didn't mention what he'd been thinking for a week, the little itch in the back of his brain that said something was off on the route, because it wasn't proof, it was just a feeling. And Evan was not the kind of person who made drama out of feelings. Still, the itch was there. It had started with packages, not missing packages exactly, but weird ones. Boxes that looked retaped, labels slightly crooked, as if someone had peeled them and put them back. Deliveries to addresses that made no sense, like a sweet bee on a dirt road with 1 mailbox and no building. Then there were the scan glitches. The scanner would ping that an item had been delivered even when he was still 2 turns away. Evan told himself it was technology being technology. He told himself the system sometimes lagged, sometimes updated late, sometimes didn't know where it was. But he also noticed a pattern. The glitches happened more often near certain stretches, near a cluster of roads with the same few last names on the mailboxes, near a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the highway for a mile before disappearing into a culvert under a rusted guardrail, near a feed store that never looked open but always had a pickup parked behind it. Evan didn't accuse anyone. He didn't tell the warehouse supervisor. He didn't tell Leah. He started taking little notes on his phone instead. Small observations, license plates, times of day, odd deliveries, a photo of a label, another of a mailbox number. Not enough to call it an investigation, enough to make the itch itchier. That morning, he was assigned the rural loop that everyone called the Long Horseshoe, a winding route that curved out into farmland, skirted a forest preserve, then came back along a highway that always smelled like wet pine. Drivers disliked it because it was slow. Evan didn't mind slow. He left the depot just after sunrise, the sky pale and clean. The van hummed. The scanner beeped in its usual bored tone. The first dozen stops were routine. Porch drops, signature required, dog barking from behind a fence, friendly wave, back into the van. By late morning, he was deeper into the countryside where cell service became a suggestion. His last confirmed delivery was at a small ranch house with a metal roof. The kind of place with a wind chime that never stopped moving. The resident signed, thanked him, and mentioned rain later. Evan nodded, made a polite comment about the clouds building, and left. After that, the record thinned. The scanner showed a few pings, but the geolocation data was messy. It looked like he'd been in two places at once. Then the pings stopped entirely. When Leah didn't get a second text by early evening, she didn't panic immediately. Evan ran late sometimes. Rural routes could trap you. A fallen branch. A tractor moving at a speed that felt like a philosophical statement. A detour that was not marked because nobody had bothered. She called his phone once. It rang, then went to voicemail. She called again. Same. By nightfall, she was no longer calm. She called the depot. The warehouse supervisor checked the system and told her Evan hadn't returned the van. That wasn't unheard of, he said, but it was unusual. The supervisor said he'd call around. Leah hung up and called Evan's sister, Mara. Mara lived 2 towns over. She and Evan weren't the kind of siblings who spoke every day, but they were close in the way practical families are close. They knew each other's rhythms, and they didn't waste time pretending. Mara heard Leah's voice and felt the floor tilt. She drove to Leah's apartment within minutes. They sat at Leah's kitchen table and made calls to coworkers, to friends, to the last few customers Evan had delivered to. Most people hadn't seen him beyond a quick handoff. One older man said Evan seemed distracted, but that could mean anything. A woman said Evan asked if she'd noticed anyone following the trucks. She laughed when she told Mara and Leah like it was a joke Evan made. Then she stopped laughing when she saw their faces. By midnight, Leah and Mara called the sheriff's office. A deputy took the report with the careful tone of someone who had heard hundreds of missing person calls. But Evan wasn't a teenager who ran off. He wasn't a person with a known history of disappearing. He wasn't a tourist who got lost. He was a working adult who vanished mid-route in a company vehicle. The deputy promised to send someone to Leah's apartment in the morning to take a formal statement. Mara didn't sleep. She sat on Leah's couch, staring at the dark window, like the night might hand Evan back if she watched hard enough. Leah tried to scroll through Evan's messages, looking for something she missed. She found the cat litter text. She found a photo Evan had sent the day before of a ridiculous mailbox shaped like a cow. She found nothing that explained why a man could drive into daylight and never come home. The next morning, the sheriff's office opened a case. They called it missing person at first. Then it became missing vehicle. Then it became possible foul play, because you don't lose a delivery van in rural America without someone noticing. The van wasn't small. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't invisible. But days passed. No one found the van. No one found Evan. The company pulled GPS data from the van's tracker and found something that made the warehouse supervisor go pale. The tracker had stopped transmitting around the same time Evan's phone went silent. It wasn't just a dead battery. It was a clean stop, like the equipment had been shut off or removed. The sheriff's office brought in a state investigator, a woman named Daria Holcomb. She was not local. She didn't have the gentle familiarity deputies often used with people they'd known since childhood. She spoke in direct, clipped sentences and listened like she could hear lies through silence. Holcomb asked for everything: scanner logs, van tracker data, delivery manifests, Evan's employment file, his phone records, his notes if he had any. Mara handed over Evan's laptop. Leah handed over a small notebook Evan kept in his work bag for route reminders. The notebook contained only ordinary things: gate codes, leave behind planter, dog bites, beware loose gravel. Nothing screamed conspiracy, but Holcomb noticed something else. Evan's notebook had a crease near the back, like he'd been opening to the same page repeatedly. Holcomb flipped to it. A list of license plates, a few partial numbers, a note that said, "Feed store back lot." Holcomb stared at it without reaction. She didn't tell Mara and Leah what she was thinking. She simply asked, "Did he mention anyone bothering him?" Leah shook her head, then hesitated. She admitted Evan had seemed tense lately, but he'd brushed it off. Mara said Evan had once joked that somebody's skimming packages, and then changed the subject. Holcomb thanked them and left. That afternoon, she drove the long horseshoe route herself, not in a marked cruiser, in an unremarkable state vehicle. She drove it slowly, stopping where Evan's last confirmed delivery had been recorded. She looked at the driveway. She looked at the road. She looked at the nearby ditch lines and culverts and hidden turnoffs. She stopped near the feed store. The place was half paint, half rust. The sign had letters missing. A chain link fence leaned like it was tired. The lot was empty in front. In back, there were tire ruts in the gravel that suggested vehicles came and went anyway. Holcomb didn't trespass. She didn't need to. She simply watched. A pickup eventually rolled in, slow, not quite casual. It parked behind the building. A man stepped out, looked around, then disappeared inside. Holcomb noted it. She drove on, and at the highway stretch where the drainage ditch ran parallel, she pulled over and walked to the guardrail. The ditch wasn't dramatic. It was just a shallow channel cut into the earth, lined with weeds and old trash caught in the grass. It smelled like wet dirt. A culvert pipe ran under the highway, dark and round as a throat. Holcomb stared into the culvert. It looked like nothing, but something about it bothered her. Maybe it was the way the weeds were pressed down near the edge, like someone had recently walked there. Maybe it was the way the dirt looked disturbed in a thin strip. Or maybe she was simply learning to respect Evan's itch. Holcomb photographed the spot. Then she drove back. The search expanded. Volunteer teams combed fields, drones scanned tree lines, dogs tracked scent where Evan's van had last pinged, but the scent ended at a roadside pull-off like it had been lifted and carried away. Weeks turned into months. A rumor grew. Rumors always grow when facts refuse to. Some people said Evan ran off with money. Some said he was mixed up in drugs. Some said he'd been taken by someone he had angered. Some said the company itself was hiding something. The company offered a reward. They printed flyers. They told drivers to work in pairs when possible. Leah stopped going to grocery stores because strangers recognized her from local news and asked questions that felt like poking a bruise. Mara started taking calls from unknown numbers because sometimes tips came that way, and sometimes they were cruel jokes. Holcomb continued working the case quietly but without the urgency that the first weeks had. The case moved into the cold case closet. Not officially closed, just folded and stored. Resources went elsewhere. Attention drifted. The only thing that didn't drift was the way Mara's mind kept circling the ditch and the culvert. She couldn't explain why. It wasn't logical. It was a magnet. Maybe because Holcomb had mentioned it once, casually, as a spot we'll revisit. Maybe because Mara had driven past it 100 times in her life and never thought about it until it became the place her brother might have vanished into. For 3 years, the ditch stayed the same. Seasons changed. Weeds grew tall, then died back. Water filled it in spring, then dried in late summer. People threw trash into it like the world was a disposable cup. And then, one late winter, a storm came through that punched the ground hard enough to rearrange it. Not a famous storm, no dramatic name, just heavy rain, then sudden freeze, then a thaw that turned dirt into soup. The county road crew went out to clear drainage channels because the highway shoulders were flooding. Ditches, culverts, grates, the unglamorous arteries of rural infrastructure. A worker named Preston Hale was assigned to the highway stretch near the culvert. Preston was the kind of man who knew every road by feel. He had grown up there. He didn't need a map. He could tell you which patch of asphalt always iced first, and which curve had a hidden dip that ate tires. He also remembered Evan Price. Everybody remembered Evan Price, even if they pretended they didn't anymore. Preston had waved at Evan's van countless times. He'd even signed for a package once, an air filter he'd ordered, back when Evan still existed as a normal guy on a normal job. Preston was clearing debris from the ditch with a rake and a long hook. He pulled out a chunk of tire. He pulled out a crushed plastic bottle. He pulled out a clump of weeds that looked like it had swallowed a license plate. Then his hook snagged something that didn't move like trash. It held. It resisted. It felt heavy in a specific way, like something sealed. Preston leaned down, braced his boots in the mud, and pulled. A black pouch surfaced from the brown water with a sucking sound. At first he thought it was a tool bag someone dropped. It was about the size of a paperback book, made of thick rubberized material with a clear window on one side. The window was cloudy with grime but intact. Preston wiped it with his glove. Inside the clear window he saw the shape of a phone, not a shattered phone, not a corroded mess, a phone. Preston's stomach tightened because nothing about that made sense. Phones didn't stay intact in ditches for years, not in that kind of wet, not in freezing temperatures, not under mud and debris, but the pouch looked like a high-end waterproof case, the kind kayakers used, the kind hikers trusted with their lives. Preston turned it over. There was no name, no text, no label, just a sealed edge and a locking clasp. He stared at it. And then, like a delayed punch, he remembered a detail from the Evan Price story. Evan's phone had never been found. Preston didn't open the pouch. He didn't want to touch whatever he was holding more than necessary. He called his supervisor and said, carefully, that he might have found something related to the missing delivery driver case. The supervisor thought Preston was exaggerating until Preston sent a photo. An hour later, deputies were on scene. Then Holcomb was on scene, older now. A little more tired around the eyes, but with the same direct posture. She looked down at the pouch and didn't speak for a moment, because it was the kind of evidence you imagine in stories, not in real cases. The kind of find that feels staged by fate. Holcomb asked Preston where exactly he found it. Preston pointed to a section of ditch near the culvert mouth. Holcomb instructed everyone to back off. She photographed the area. She had the pouch placed in an evidence container like it was a fragile animal. Mara got the call that afternoon. She was at work, staring at her screen, pretending her life had moved on. When she saw the sheriff's number, her heart kicked like it was trying to escape her ribs. Holcomb told her to come to the station. Mara drove like she wasn't sure the road would still exist if she went too slow. Leah came too. They sat across from Holcomb in a small room that smelled like old paper and coffee. Holcomb placed a photo on the table. The black phone pouch. Leah's eyes filled immediately. Mara's hands went numb. Holcomb didn't soften her tone, but she did slow down. County road crew found this in a drainage ditch near the highway stretch on the route Evan was running, she said. It was sealed. It appears to contain a phone. Leah whispered, almost against her will, that it must be his. Holcomb said, "We're not assuming yet. We're confirming." Mara couldn't stop herself. "How is it not destroyed?" Holcomb looked at her. "That's a good question," she said. "Either it was placed there recently, or it was protected very well, or it wasn't in the water the whole time." Mara felt chills. Holcomb continued, "We're sending it to the lab. If the phone powers on, we'll treat it like a time capsule." A time capsule. Mara hated that phrase. It made her brother's life sound like an artifact. But Holcomb was right. If the phone was Evan's, it might hold what the case had never had, a voice. The lab technicians opened the pouch under controlled conditions. They documented everything. They photographed the seal, the latch, the interior. When they slid the phone out, the first surprise was how clean it was. Not spotless. There were faint scratches, a smear of dried mud along the edge, but no obvious corrosion. They plugged it into a forensic charger. The screen lit. A low battery icon blinked like a slow heartbeat. Then the phone powered on. Holcomb watched the technician's face change from professional neutrality to something like disbelief. Because phones didn't do that after 3 years in a ditch. They just didn't. Unless, as Holcomb had already suspected, the ditch hadn't held it the whole time. The phone was locked, but that wasn't a wall. The lab had tools. They extracted data. They built a mirror image of the device so they could analyze without altering evidence. Holcomb received the first report the next day. The phone belonged to Evan Price. They confirmed it through account identifiers and device registration. Holcomb then read the next line of the report and felt her mouth go dry. The last activity on the phone did not end on the day Evan vanished. There were entries, not many, but enough. A few voice memos, a handful of photos, a draft message that had never been sent, and one location note titled simply, "If anything happens." Holcomb stared at those words until they blurred, because that wasn't a coincidence. That was intent. She requested a meeting with Mara and Leah. They sat in the same small room. Holcomb placed her hands flat on the table like she was anchoring herself. "I'm going to tell you what we found," Holcomb said. and I need you to understand something. This may change what you believe happened. It may also change what we can do next." Leah's fingers twisted together until her knuckles went white. Mara said, "Just say it." Holcomb nodded once. "The phone contains a draft message," she said. "It was never sent. It reads like Evan was trying to leave information behind." Leah made a sound like she'd been punched. Mara stared, unblinking. Holcomb continued, "There are voice memos, short ones. They don't have clear timestamps we can trust because of the device state, but the content is recent to the day he vanished." Mara's voice came tight. "What do they say?" Holcomb didn't play them in that room. She wasn't cruel. She summarized. In one memo, Evan says he thinks packages are being diverted. He describes a pattern of fake addresses and scan glitches. He says he thinks someone on the route is doing it. Mara closed her eyes because it felt like an itch finally speaking. Holcomb added, "In another memo, he says he's being watched." Leah whispered, "By who?" Holcomb shook her head. "He doesn't name a person. He says there's a pickup that appears behind him on certain stretches. He says he saw the same truck behind the feed store." Mara's hands trembled. Holcomb leaned forward slightly. "Then there's the note titled, 'If Anything Happens.' It contains a location. It also contains a single sentence. 'This is where they told me to meet.'" Mara swallowed. "Where?" Holcomb slid a printed map across the table. The point was a short distance from the culvert ditch. Not far. Close enough that Mara felt sick. It was an old turnout near a tree line, a place where you could pull off without being seen by passing cars. Holcomb said, "We're treating that as a possible contact point." Leah stared at the map and whispered, "So he met someone." Holcomb didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "We are going to search that area with fresh eyes." The case reopened like a door that had never fully shut, only stuck. Holcomb assembled a small team. Not the big volunteer searches of years ago. This was surgical, ground-penetrating radar, dogs, metal detectors, careful grid search. They searched the turnout. They found nothing in the open, but along the tree line, half hidden under dead brush, a dog alerted. Deputies pulled back branches and found a small depression, almost like someone had dug and then filled it back in. They dug carefully. They found a second item sealed in plastic. Not a wallet, not a phone, a scanner, a handheld delivery scanner, cracked but recognizable. It was the company's model, the type Evan had carried. Holcomb's team bagged it as evidence. The serial number was still visible. It belonged to Evan's route. They also found a broken piece of van mirror and a strip of the company's reflective decal. Not enough to find the van. Enough to confirm the turnout was not just a meeting point. Something had happened there. Holcomb expanded outward. She traced dirt tracks behind the turnout into the woods. The tracks were old and faint, but old doesn't mean meaningless. Old tracks become habits. The trail led to a narrow service road used by farmers, then to a stretch behind the feed store. Holcomb obtained a warrant. The feed store owner tried to act confused when deputies arrived. He said he didn't know anything about Evan. He said he didn't control what people did in the back lot. Holcomb didn't argue. She simply walked the back lot. There were sheds, a rusted shipping container, a shallow trench where trash had been burned. Behind the container, the ground was stained darker. Not blood, oil, chemical residue. Something heavy had sat there and leaked. Holcomb's team found tire tracks with a distinctive tread. They took casts. They found a discarded roll of reflective decal similar to the company van's markings. They found a pile of shredded cardboard with shipping labels torn off, enough to make Holcomb's suspicion sharpen into something close to certainty. But still, no van. Still, no Evan. The phone data gave one more gift. Photos. They weren't selfies, they weren't scenic shots. They were the kind of photos someone takes when they're trying to document proof. Fast. Close-ups of shipping labels, a picture of a pickup tailgate, a blurry photo through a windshield of a man standing behind the feed store, face partially turned away. And then there was one photo that made Holcomb sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling for a long time. It was a photo of a drainage ditch. The same ditch from a higher angle taken close to the culvert. And in the edge of the frame, you could see Evan's hand holding the phone pouch open, as if he had been preparing it, as if he had been hiding it. Holcomb realized something that made her feel both impressed and nauseated. Evan had not accidentally lost his phone in that ditch. He had sealed it. He had planned for someone to find it later. But why would a missing man plan an evidence drop? Unless he believed he might not be able to speak, unless he believed he might not survive, unless he believed the case would go cold without a breadcrumb. Holcomb revisited the ditch find location with new context. Preston had found the pouch snagged in weeds near the culvert mouth, not buried deep. That suggested it had been moved by recent stormwater. But where had it been before the storm loosened it? Holcomb ordered a search upstream. The ditch ran behind a series of properties, then curved toward an old drainage basin near an abandoned quarry road. Upstream, the team found something that had been overlooked for years because it looked like nothing. A small access hatch at the edge of the basin, an old maintenance compartment for the drainage system. It was locked, but the lock was old. They cut it. Inside was a shallow cavity where someone could hide items above the waterline. Dry most of the year, damp in storms. Holcomb climbed down carefully and shined a light. And there, wedged behind a pipe, was another sealed pouch. Empty, but with a strip of duct tape inside it, folded. On the tape, pressed faintly, was a partial fingerprint and a hair cotton adhesive. It wasn't a message. It was something else. It was Evan's attempt to trap whoever handled the pouch. Holcomb exhaled slowly. Not a dramatic breath, a professional one. Evan had been building a case, which meant Evan had discovered something he believed mattered enough to risk his life. Holcomb turned her attention to the company's package system, something law enforcement rarely wanted to touch because it was boring. It was spreadsheets and scan times and route logs. But boring systems are where theft hides. Holcomb requested internal audit data and compared it with Evan's route notes recovered from his phone. She found clusters of lost packages, always on the same stretches, always in the same general area, always involving addresses that could not be verified. She also found that some packages were flagged as delivered without signature when signature was required. Someone was manipulating the scan events. That required access, either to the scanner software or to the scanners themselves. Holcomb asked the company who handled equipment calibration, who repaired scanners, who swapped units when one broke. The answer pointed to a small subcontractor the depot used for device servicing, a man named Roland Vick. Roland Vick lived near the feed store. Holcomb didn't jump. She checked his background. Minor charges, nothing major. A business license that had been renewed reliably. A wife. A teenage son. He looked normal on paper. Holcomb had seen enough to know that normal on paper could be a costume. She obtained a warrant for Vic's equipment shop. The shop was a two-bay garage behind his house. Inside were shelves of electronics parts, scanner housings, battery packs. Everything looked like a legitimate repair operation, until a deputy opened a cabinet labeled obsolete. Inside were dozens of shipping labels, peeled and stacked, and behind those a box of scanners. Some were company issued, some were not. One scanner had Evan's route serial number. Holcomb's chest tightened. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply felt the case click one notch closer to truth. They arrested Roland Vic. He acted outraged. He insisted he repaired devices as requested. He insisted he had no idea why labels were in his cabinet. He insisted he'd never met Evan Price. Holcomb placed a photo on the interview table. The blurry image from Evan's phone. A man behind the feed store. Roland's eyes flicked to it and away. Holcomb said, "That's you." Roland laughed too quickly. Holcomb didn't argue. She asked a different question. "Where is the van?" Roland's face changed, not to fear but to calculation, like a man deciding what lie costs less. He said he didn't know what she meant. Holcomb let silence sit. Roland spoke again, slower. He said he could explain the scanners. He said he bought used units. He said he refurbished them and sold them. Holcomb said, "That doesn't explain why a driver vanished." Roland stared at the table. Then he said something that was almost a confession, and almost not. He said, "He wasn't supposed to go looking." Holcomb's voice stayed flat. "So he did." Roland shrugged slightly. Holcomb leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Roland didn't answer. Holcomb presented him with what she had. The scanners, the labels, the pattern of diverted packages. She didn't mention the hair and the duct tape yet. She didn't mention every detail. She held back. She knew he'd talk more if he believed he could still control the narrative. Roland finally said Evan had confronted someone. He said Evan had come behind the feed store and asked why packages were being relabeled. Roland claimed he told Evan to mind his own business. Roland claimed Evan left. Holcomb said he didn't. Roland's jaw tightened. Holcomb said, "Where is the van?" Roland said he didn't know. Holcomb paused. Then she said, "Evan hid his phone in a sealed pouch. He planned for someone to find it. He left a location note. He left evidence. He didn't vanish by accident. He vanished because he stumbled into your operation." Roland's eyes lifted, hard. Holcomb said, "The only question left is whether he's alive." Roland looked away. Silence sat again. Then Roland said very quietly that Evan had been moved. Holcomb kept her voice controlled. "Moved where?" Roland said he didn't know the final place. Holcomb didn't believe him. But she believed he was now scared. Because if Evan had been moved, it meant more people were involved. And people who operate in groups fear being left holding the bag. Holcomb went after the group. She traced financial records from Roland's shop, purchases that didn't match repair supplies, industrial plastic wrap, heavy-duty straps, fuel canisters, rented storage units. One storage unit was rented under a name that didn't match Roland's, but matched someone else's in the company's vendor list. A dispatcher assistant at the depot, a man named Travis Knoll. Holcomb had seen Knoll's name in the logs. Knoll was the guy who swapped routes around, who fixed scan discrepancies with a few clicks, who always seemed to know where every driver was. Holcomb obtained a warrant for the storage unit. Inside was a mess of boxes, packaging materials, a stack of high-value items still in original shipping cartons, electronics, luxury goods, the kind of stuff that gets stolen because it's easy to resell. And in the back corner, under a tarp, was something that made Leah collapse when Holcomb later told her. It was the delivery van, or what remained of it. The van had been stripped, its VIN plate removed, its company logos peeled, but the shape was unmistakable. Holcomb's team processed it carefully. They found Evan's fingerprints in the driver area. They found his hat under the seat. They found a crushed water bottle. They found nothing that directly answered the question of where Evan went. But the van was a sentence. It said, "He didn't drive away. They arrested Travis Knoll." Knoll talked faster than Roland. He was the kind of man who panicked in paragraphs. He blamed everyone else. He claimed he was just helping. He claimed the theft ring was bigger than him, and he was trapped. When Holcomb asked about Evan, Knoll's face twisted. He said Evan wasn't supposed to fight. Holcomb didn't ask him to clarify. She didn't want a dramatic statement. She wanted details. Knoll said Evan had been brought to the turnout. Knoll said they told him to stop poking around. Knoll said Evan refused, said he would report them. Knoll said someone hit Evan, not killed him, Knoll insisted. Not that, just enough to make him stop resisting, enough to make him quiet. Holcomb's hands tightened under the table. Knoll said they moved Evan to a safe place to wait until things cooled. Holcomb asked where. Knoll said an old hunting cabin near the quarry road. Holcomb's team moved immediately. They found the cabin. It was a squat building half hidden by trees, used occasionally by hunters and teenagers looking for privacy. Inside, they found signs someone had been there for a long time. Not recently, not last week, but at some point. A mattress on the floor, empty cans, a blanket, a torn piece of Evan's uniform shirt. No person, no body, just absence. Holcomb stared at the mattress and felt the case shift again, like it had when the phone powered on. Because if Evan had been held and then removed, there were only two outcomes. Either he didn't survive, or he survived and left. Holcomb returned to Evan's phone data and looked again at the unsent draft message. It was short, not a dramatic farewell, just a compressed note written by someone with limited time. If I don't come back, look at the ditch. Don't trust the scans. Tell Mara I'm sorry. Tell Leah I love her. Holcomb read it twice, then a third time. There was no help, no call police, no I'm being held. It read less like a man trapped and more like a man trying to plant a fuse before the match was taken away. Holcomb began to suspect Evan had escaped at some point, that he had chosen not to return because returning would put Mara and Leah in danger. It sounded insane when you said it out loud, but nothing about the case had been normal. Holcomb requested bank activity on Evan's accounts. After he vanished, nothing moved. No withdrawals, no purchases, no card use. It was clean. Then months later, long after the disappearance, there was a single attempted login to an old email account tied to Evan's name. It didn't succeed, but it came from a public library network in a neighboring state. Holcomb tracked it to a county library 3 hours away. She drove there. The librarian on duty was wary when law enforcement asked questions, but Holcomb had a warrant, and she had patience. They checked security footage. A man sat at a public computer, hood up, posture tense. He used the computer for less than an hour. He left without checking out any books. Holcomb zoomed the footage. The man's face was partly obscured by the hood, but the jawline looked familiar. The shoulders, the way he held himself like someone bracing for impact. Holcomb's heart didn't race. She was too practiced for that, but something inside her tightened. She asked the library staff if the man had spoken to anyone. One staff member remembered him because he asked one question in a hoarse voice: where the nearest bus station was. Holcomb checked nearby bus station cameras. She found him again, smaller in frame, stepping onto a bus with a backpack that looked like it had lived a hard life. He vanished into the transit system. Holcomb did what she could. She tracked bus routes. She checked shelters. She checked clinics. She checked arrests. Nothing. Time passed again, but the case didn't go back into the closet. Now it had legs. Now it had suspects. Now it had the shape of a story with a possible living ending. Holcomb held the ring together long enough to flip it. Roland and Noel both faced serious charges. The depot launched internal reviews. The company wanted to bury the scandal, but they couldn't. Too much evidence, too many stolen goods, too much embarrassment. Mara and Leah sat through hearings like they were watching their own lives from behind glass. Leah asked Holcomb repeatedly whether she believed Evan was alive. Holcomb didn't offer comfort. She said, "I believe there's a reasonable possibility." Mara hated reasonable. She wanted certainty. But certainty was a luxury missing families rarely got. Then one afternoon, nearly a year after the phone pouch was found, Holcomb received a call from an out-of-state detective. A hospital in a small town had admitted a man with an old injury flare-up. The man had no ID. He provided a name that didn't check out, but his fingerprints matched a missing person entry flagged nationally: Evan Price. Holcomb didn't let herself exhale until she was in her car, driving. Evan was thinner, older in the face, the kind of older you become when you stop sleeping deeply. He looked up when Holcomb entered the room, and his expression did something strange. Relief and fear tangled together, like he wanted to be found, but also had been building walls against it. Holcomb spoke calmly. She didn't want to spook him. She told him Mara and Leah were alive. She told him the ring had been arrested. She told him his phone had been found. Evan closed his eyes as if the word phone hurt. He didn't talk much at first. Not because he couldn't, but because he had been living in a world where talking got you hurt. Over the next days, with medical staff ensuring he was stable and Holcomb conducting interviews carefully, Evan's account emerged. He confirmed the theft operation. He confirmed he had been documenting it. He confirmed he had been followed. He said he planned to report it, but he wanted more proof because he feared being dismissed. He admitted he hid his phone in the ditch deliberately. He said he chose the ditch because it was near his route, and because the drainage basin access hatch stayed dry unless there was a big storm. He said he sealed the phone because he believed if he disappeared, someone would search the ditch sooner or later. He said he left the location note because he was told to meet someone. He went to the turnout expecting intimidation, maybe a threat. He didn't expect violence. He said he was hit. He said he woke up in the cabin. He said he tried to stay calm, tried to observe, tried to wait for a moment. The moment came on a night when the men who held him got drunk and sloppy. Evan slipped out. He ran through woods. He reached a road. He flagged a truck. The driver didn't stop. He walked for hours until his legs felt like someone else's. He didn't go home. That was the decision that broke Mara's heart when she later heard it. Evan said he believed the ring had deeper connections. He believed if he returned, they would go after Leah, go after Mara. He said he didn't trust that law enforcement would protect them if the wrong person was involved. He said he chose distance as protection. He survived on odd jobs. He slept in shelters. He moved often. He avoided being photographed. He avoided hospitals. He avoided anything that required ID. He said the phone in the ditch was his insurance. His one scream stored in plastic. When Holcomb told him it had finally been found because of a storm, Evan stared at the ceiling and let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob combined. He whispered that he'd hoped it would be found sooner. Holcomb asked why he had tried to log into his old email at the library. Evan said quietly that he wanted to see if Mara had kept writing him messages, because even when you hide, you still want proof you mattered. Mara and Leah drove to the hospital the moment Holcomb called. When Mara stepped into the room and saw Evan, she froze. Not because she didn't recognize him, because she did. Because recognition after years feels like a hallucination. Leah covered her mouth and started crying before she even reached him. Evan tried to stand and winced. Mara moved fast and pressed her forehead to his shoulder like she was afraid he'd evaporate. Leah held his hand and shook like a person trying to stop a storm inside her body. There was no dramatic speech, no movie reunion line, just breathing. Just a long, ugly crying that felt like the body cleaning itself. After Evan recovered enough to travel, he returned home under protection. The company tried to frame him as a hero. Evan hated it. He didn't want hero, he wanted normal. He wanted a day where a scan beep meant a scan beep and not a threat. He testified against the ring. He confirmed details only he could confirm. He helped prosecutors map the theft operation. He didn't take pleasure in it. He did it like he delivered packages, methodically, with the goal of finishing the route. Roland Vick and Travis Knoll both took plea deals. Names came out. More arrests followed. It turned out the ring had been diverting high-value packages for years, using a mix of fake addresses and hacked scan events. They weren't geniuses. They were just exploiting a system that assumed everyone was honest. Evan's case also forced the company to overhaul equipment handling. Scanners were tracked more tightly. Route anomalies were audited. Drivers were trained to report patterns without fear of being labeled paranoid. That mattered, not because it healed what happened, but because it made the next Evan less likely. Sometimes months later, Mara would drive past the highway stretch where the ditch ran. She would glance at the guardrail and feel her throat tighten, because the ditch had been the quiet witness the whole time, the place where Evan's voice waited in a sealed pouch while the world moved on. Mara asked him once why he chose a phone pouch. Evan shrugged. He said he'd seen a fisherman at the gas station with one hanging around his neck. Evan bought one that same day, tucked it in his bag like a secret. He said he didn't know if it would work. He just needed something that could hold proof longer than people's attention spans. Leah asked him if he ever regretted not coming home sooner. Evan stared out the window for a long time before answering. He said yes. Then he said no. Then he said the truth was uglier. He regretted that he had to choose it all. He also admitted something that made Leah's skin prickle. He said, the scariest part wasn't the cabin. Leah asked what was. Evan said, how easy it was for people to rewrite the story. Accident, drugs, runaway. Anything that made him feel like a choice rather than a victim. The ring had counted on that. Not just on locks and rural roads, but on the way communities get tired of mysteries, the way they fill gaps with whatever makes them comfortable. Evan survived partly because he was stubborn, partly because he got lucky, and partly because he left a sealed scream in a ditch that waited for the right storm. A drainage ditch revealed a phone pouch. Inside was a voice that refused to die quietly, and when it finally surfaced, it dragged an entire hidden operation into the light, one muddy inch at a time.